Once again, I thank everyone. So we'll talk about the multi-scale nature of cement and concrete primarily, and we'll be looking at cementitious materials and concrete from a very large number of length scales and time scales. So this is my view of as usually a rather a structural um, engineer's point of view of the cementitious materials that are used for infrastructure. So here you can see on the left corner, bottom corner, there's tobermorite, which is a component of the CSH gel, and that is we are modeling the phenomena at the nanoscale, wherein nano dimensions as well as nanoseconds are the durations of the phenomena. Then we have the micro scale, which is at the cement level. We have the representative volume element, so the lengths are in micro scale. Again, the phenomena which occur, all these chemical phenomena, reactions, they all occur at the micro level, micro, nano, in between that time scales. And then we come to the RCC member section level, which we are all much familiar with. We have, this is the mesoscale, centimeter scale. So here we look at the, how the macroscopic or the mesoscale cracking of the concrete, cross section. We have the cracking in the tensile part of the concrete, the outer confined concrete, yielding of the tensile steel, etc. We looked at confinement behaviors. So various models are available for computing these section level behaviors, right? And then at the structure level, when you come, we can model a structural system, and for that we have computational models, right? And then it is also possible nowadays to model entire structural complexes, wherein these structures, neighboring structures, are interacting with each other, where we, if you want to look into things like pounding action, or some sort of complex interactions between the structures, for example, not only during earthquakes but also during, say, let's say, wind interactions, things like that. And also modeling the evacuation of buildings during emergencies such as fire. And talking about emergencies and disasters, we have on the rightmost, you have two sort of hazards. One is earthquake, and another is terrorist blast, explosive blast. So here you can see in earthquakes that the extent is of a geographic scale. This is a state itself, right? Here we are seeing the contours of pre-ground acceleration and probable damage. So this takes place in terms of geographical scale, in terms of minutes. And on the same scale, we have right below it, we have blast, which also takes place at the geographic scale only, right? But the event itself is in micro to milliseconds. So it is, so the temporal nature of this is different. So these are all part of some of the research which we have been doing over the past decades. Thought I will share with you. So concrete is the most important widely used construction material. It's also the most complex composite material. And the mathematical models that can accurately capture the material behavior under all sorts of conditions is very, very scarce. So, and there are lots of innumerable amount of models are existing, but they're, they can only look at certain very narrow aspects of the concrete behavior. So there, and then there is also limited data for calibration, validation of experiments, new phenomena. So there is a scarcity of robust, transparent, and comprehensive methods. One single theory of concrete does not exist, right? So cement is it itself concrete is a cementitious composite, and then concrete consists of, it can be categorized into several levels: level 4, 3, 2, 1, right? So if you start from the top, if you see that level 4, which is in the scale of centimeters, tens of centimeters, so you can see that concrete is a composite material. It has aggregates with interface transition zone, and it is embedded in a homogeneous. At that level, the mortar looks homogeneous, right? And then we have, if you zoom into the mortar, then you will see that there is again sand particles which are embedded in a homogeneous looking cement paste. So again, it's sort of a self similarity is there between level 4 and level 3. And then at the level 2, you see that there is a cement paste, which we have zoomed into. And then now you can see that it has, these CSH gel in which you have large crystals, unhydrated inclusions, water porosity, all these things are embedded within this homogeneous CSH matrix. So various phenomena such as diffusion, percolation can be modeled or studied at this level. And then below that, where you are looking at pure CSH, right, you have two different types of CSH gels. And there are several others for various other, the geopolymers and other things have various other gel type formations or polymerase formations. But let us, if focusing on the the most typical cementitious material, we have CSH gel, and then exact morphology and the volume fractions again depend on the water cement ratio, the porosity in this, and this is at the level of microns. Now, if you see, when you're at the micro or nano or that level, obviously you have to treat matter as discrete. Matter is not continuous anymore. So you have to go in for molecular dynamics simulation. The levels above that can be modeled using continuum based finite element, or maybe quasi discrete lattice based methods, or and above that, finite element and homogenization, upper bounds, lower bounds, rules of mixtures can be used. So there are several ways to model or compute the material properties, effective material properties. So this figure shows the various dimensional range of solids and pores in the hydrated cement paste. So you can see from 1 nanometer to 10 range, you have all these sorts of voids, including the spacing between CSH sheets, capillary voids, entrained air bubbles, hexagonal crystals, maximum spacing, various entrapped air voids, various inclusions, right? So various ranges of solids and pores in the hydrated cement paste. So this is another view of one, the 4-level view of concrete that we presented, which you've seen in the previous slide. So here, if you see on the top left corner, you have level 4, which says concrete, right? And that is let us say this is a window or a sample that is 30 by 30 which is the size roughly slightly larger than the size of the typical aggregate. So here you can see that you have aggregate, and then it is embedded in a matrix of mortar. And then if we zoom into the mortar, right? If you zoom into the mortar, here you see, okay, firstly in level 4, you see there is a scale, there are divisions in the bottom. So now you've zoomed into it, each of these divisions is this big. Okay, so now you can see that the mortar, which was quite homogeneous here, now itself consists of sand particles. Now this is something which is 2 centimeter, 2 millimeter by 2 millimeter on a side, right? So this is a millimeter scale, and you can see that the sand particle now looks like it's an aggregate embedded in cement paste. You have unreacted cement grains and all these things you can see. And if you further zoom into this, let's say the 300 micron level, 0.3 mm, right? So you can see there's CSH matrix, you can see unreacted cement grains, etc. And if you zoom further in, you'll see that there is inside this, when you see the CSH matrix, you have the CSH solid and the water-filled nanopores. So these two combined form the CSH gel. So modeling of phenomena which are occurring within RCC or reinforced cement concrete, right, which is basically concrete with steel embedded in it. So it should include a framework which can solve the multiple physics that is happening, multiple phenomena that are happening in terms of the mechanical as well as the chemical processes. And these have to be modeled in both time and space, because they might be, the extent of these reactions might be changing, the rate of reactions might be changing, they might be developing new materials, new phases might be coming in, right? So some of these processes are like the cement heat of hydration and thermal conduction, pore structure formation of the cement paste. Then you have the moisture, it travels from one place to the other, right? So you have the mass transport, and then you have the chemical equilibrium of chloride and chloride ion transport, which is dominated by chloride basically. And then you have carbonation, and how the dissolved carbon dioxide migrates through the material. And you need to have the mass equilibrium, you have to have the uh, temperature equilibrium, all these things. So thermodynamics and chemical equilibrium theory has to be applied for these multi-scale to understand what is happening in true, without any sort of simplification. All these things have to be taken into account. So this is just a schematic of, for example, you start off on the top green portion, wherein you have a structure and it is subjected to environmental actions and external loads. And then what we do is we zoom into that, and we see that there's there's a aggregate and cement paste multi system, or a composite material, right, in which the aggregate is embedded within a matrix. So, and then we have reinforcement also. So when we look at this further, we can see that there is a lot of interaction between each of these levels, right? It is not that you can look at each of these separately. They have to be, so the top level becomes the boundary condition for the bottom level. So for example, if you're looking, and we'll talk about this in further slides. So aggregate is surrounded by the cement paste, and then you have an interface transition zone. And how do you model the interface transition zone, right? And then how do you model the flow properties of this material over time? So all these things have to be addressed. So for example, other phenomena like corrosion of steel and dissolved oxygen transport, calcium ions, chrome, it's also a dissolution and micro migration happens. And then we have the macro damage and crack evolution processes. And then you see the structure is placed under stresses, and then macro defects can be there. So we can look at things in terms of continuum plasticity, fracture mechanics, right? Theory of elasticity based solutions can be obtained. And then we have to solve for the compatibility, equilibrium, as well as constitutive modeling based on the the continuum mechanics theory. So here what we do is we at this level, the averaging of all the defects, and you look at a homogeneous material. So finite elements and such tools can be used, which we'll talk about later. And then another phenomena is the creep and cyclic loading. So these aspects look at the durability of the concrete material and how it behaves under sustained stress or strain or cyclic variations of various environmental actions, agents, loads, etc. So these phenomena are not independent. They are all mutually interlinked with each other, and a complex figure of interaction has to be expressed in terms of the state parameters of various governing differential equations have to be linked up. So these are all non-linear coupled differential equations which have to be solved. I will not be presenting it, all those things here, don't worry please. But the overall message that goes from here should be that none of these processes, phenomena are independent of each other. They are all linked to each other. So for example, you have temperature and pore water pressure can be seen in modeling of hydration, moisture equilibrium, constitutive law of the hardened cement paste. So all these things, they are all linked. And then each of these mechanisms can be modeled individually, okay, within a particular volume of material, representative volume of the material, and they can be a lot of user defined code and things have to be written for doing research in this area. So what is this multi-scale modeling that we've been talking about? So the philosophy is to apply very simple models at the smallest scales or component level and let them interact and simulate that interaction. And what happens is that a complex behavior or response emerges at the system level as a result of this interaction across multiple physical scales and time scales. So what happens is that multiple models are used at different scales simultaneously to describe a system. So different models usually focus on the different scales of resolution. There might be models for looking at the atomic level, models for the microscopic level, models separately which look at mesoscale and macro scale levels. So, and these may be looking at different phenomena, but they are all interlinked because it is the same material. It is one and the same material. Only thing is, because of our limited viewpoints or the science, the mathematical modeling aspects are such that we have to discretize the time and discretize the domain in such a way. So that's why they are different, but the material is the same. So the motivation is that the available macro scale models are not. Why do we do the multi-scale model? What is the motivation? Is that macro scale models, which basically homogenize, you use FCK or E or Poisson ratio, EKG, right? All these things are not accurate enough, and in some cases these on the macro level, right? And when you go to the micro level, they are not efficient enough. There's too much information in some cases, too much work to be done to get some small piece of information in some times. So we need to find out ways to combine these two such that firstly we bridge across various scales. We can find out, hey, if cracking is happening in certain material, what is happening at the various scales? How can we predict cracking from ab initio, meaning without making much assumptions, but from basic principles? How can we predict material degradation? That is the principle, or material properties. So we have to arrive at certain compromise between the accuracy and efficiency also. That's also required. So there are various types of excuse me, various types of multi-scale problems. There's type A problems where locally there are some phenomena happening, chemical reactions, singularities or defects, stress concentration and things like this. So a micro scale model in this case is used to resolve the or obtain the local behavior of this event. So how is that stress concentration happening, or how is that chemical reaction happening on that particular surface layer? Things like this. And you focus on that particular spot, and on the boundary conditions you use macro scale models, homogenized boundary conditions. The type B is basically problems for which constitutive information is missing in the macro scale model, and the coupling with the micro scale model is required in order to supply this missing information. So for example, suppose you are looking at macro scale fracture and you want to look at under fatigue. So that information of those micro defects is important because that will affect your fatigue life, right? The macro cracking gets affected by these micro cracks. So this sort of coupling is required. Some constitutive information from the micro level to the macro level has to be passed in this case. So at least two levels of models have to be used in these problems. So at the core of multi-scale model are models, right, which bridge from one scale of time or dimension to another scale. And they take this phenomena, whatever is the values or the properties that you're computing, they aggregate them, bring them to the upper level. So multi-scale analysis allows determining the relationship between the models at different scales of resolutions, and multi-scale model allows you to formulate the models which couple together the models. So how is the one is the relationship between the model, right, at different scales of resolution, how are they coupled, and how to develop algorithms to which allow use of multi-scale ideas, this scale bridging and all these things, how to apply these, how to design these and create computational algorithm. That's a hot topic of research right now. So, so one of the other ways is to do sequential or hierarchical multi-scale modeling, wherein one has a at the micro scale you homogenize the material and take it up to the macro scale. So if you in a macro scale model is like a gas dynamic equation, PV equal to nRT, right? So here you have the equation of state. It's computed using the kinetic theory of gases. So you are not worried about individual gas atoms or gas molecules, right? So another is, even in molecular dynamics, there are further lower levels wherein parameters can be computed from quantum mechanics. Things like the orbitals and all these things can be pre-computed. They don't have to be computed every time. So this is also mostly limited to cases where only few parameters exist, and it's also called parameter passing. So you take the parameter from one level, micro level, to the, and you pass it on to the, you collect them or average them. For example, density at the micro level might be varying from point A to point B, but what you do is when you bring it up to the macro level, you average these two densities at point A, B, and let's say C, take the average of them and pass it on to the higher level at the macro level. So that is called parameter passing or averaging or homogenizing. Okay. So you can always have up to 6 or more variables can be calculated like this. So this is what you see. So on the left, you see the small cube, right? So when the properties of this part are known or presumed, okay, and then from this you calculate the local properties from the lower scale element, and then from here you calculate the global properties to be simulated and pass to the higher scale. This is the higher scale, right? So at each level, you're seeing that it is made of, the cube becomes homogeneous. So this cube, which is at the global level, this gray cube, right? So in which you have this subcube, which is a homogeneous, but it in fact consists of so many other components. So this is the hierarchical multi-scale modeling, but it is only one way. You can see the arrow going only one way, right? So in concurrent or hierarchical, in concurrent, it is what happens is that there is a loop and they're talking to one another, the micro scale and the meso scale and the macro scale. So the quantities needed in the macro scale are computed on the fly, meaning during the computation, the macro scale quantities are computed from the micro scale and then taken up. So this is like a loop. For each time loop, there is no pre-computing. So, in most of the cases, so few things can be pre-computed, but other things, they are, the parameters, they are computed within the loops, within the time loops. So macro and micro scale models are used concurrently. They are used simultaneously in this case. So for example, you want to do interatomic forces from the first principles instead of modeling them empirically. So in such cases, more efficient to do the on-the-fly calculation. So pre-computing the interatomic forces as function of positions, all these things is too many independent variables. So you may have to calculate for a small portion what is happening there microscopically and bring it up to the average it and bring it up to the macro level. So there are several examples of multi-scale methods. You have the quantum mechanics, molecular mechanics methods. It's a type A problem wherein you can do the pre-computing, right? And then in chemical reactions, involving large molecules, right? What happens is that something is happening only in the between the molecules, between the active areas of the atoms which are involved in the reaction. So you don't have to bother about the rest of the molecule. That can be treated as just the geometry can be made and boundary conditions can be given. Okay, it just serves to provide the environment for the reaction. Okay, so this is one type of. So various computational methodologies, here I have presented with increasing spatio-temporal scale, meaning the time and the dimension, the space, the volumes which are considered are increasing. So you go from density functional theory, molecular dynamics, dislocation dynamics, cellular automata, all these things, you have crystal plasticity, finite element method, which we are all familiar with, then finite difference, fast Fourier transforms, agent-based modeling, and then hierarchical decision models are also there. These are the various computational methodologies which are used in material science for characterizing material behavior at various levels of accuracy, various spatio-temporal scales. So this here you see, you're modeling the atom, and then that's the quantum mechanics based, where you look into the density functional theory, where you're modeling the bonds, where you're modeling the orbitals, not just the bonds, but the orbitals, and looking at the electrostatic charges and all those things from the first principles, basically. Right? You're solving the Schrodinger equation. And then the higher level, now this is at the angstrom and picosecond levels. At the higher levels, you have the molecular dynamics with reactions, right? And further up, you have the molecular dynamics, wherein you're looking at the force field based molecular dynamics, right? It is like nothing but a spring mass system, lattice of spring mass connected to each other, right? And then there is something called coarse graining, which can happen at the micro level, where you lump these several hundred thousand of these atoms together into masses, and then you can find what is the material behavior at the micro level. And then higher above that is you have the finite element methods, which we are very familiar with, at the millimeter and the meter scales. So there is also other problems, wherein pre-computing is not feasible. For example, the Karpariano molecular dynamics, wherein knowing the position, you should be able to evaluate the electronic structure and the interatomic forces, but you cannot keep doing that for large atoms, large molecules everywhere. So what they do is, the interatomic forces are calculated for those particular regions where there is a reaction, and then we look at that. And then there is the other method called the quasi-continuum method, wherein the entire continuum or the matter, the material, is represented as lattice, okay, set of lattice points, and the deformation is represented on a triangulation, and you have basically, again, here we can start using the finite elements. So basically you have these truss elements or beam elements with the nodes showing the, depicting the lattice points. And then you can analyze the mechanical behavior of regular crystalline materials, crystalline solids, based on atomic models. And then it looks, so here you can look at, deformation, all these things can be deformation gradients, strains, overall, behavior of the material can be looked at. So it simplifies the calculation of the energy of a trial configuration. So here is an interesting thing, that when people model atoms and molecules or microscopic objects, they don't really know how it is configured, what is the shape. So it has to be, there is something called energy minimization that has to take place, wherein the natural shape of the atom comes into, the atom goes to the, or starts losing energy and goes to its ground state. You must have heard all of this in your high school and early chemistry. So the molecule goes to its ground state, meaning the shape of the molecule and the internal energy in the molecule, basically the strain energy, the potential energy of the thing is lowest. At that time, whatever is the shape of the molecule, that is what happens in nature. Okay, so that is the most representative. So this is done using, once they do get the energy of a trial configuration, then they can use the evaluate the energy density, and for you can apply this for dislocations, boundary interactions. People do nano indentation and fracture modeling. So this is how it looks like. So you have this domain which is divided into lattices. So at each, right, it's triangular lattice, and then you have these nodes, and you have, this is the representative atom in the middle. It has a nearest neighbor circle. So, and then you're talking, so this is the, at the edge, it is at the transition point between continuum and atomistic method. So here you need to have a handshake algorithm. So if you look at this here, it's all angstroms, hundreds of angstroms. So it's not yet even microns. So here you see finite element, this sort of lattice, and then you can see these this sort of defect happening here. So there's other multi-grid, fast multipole methods. And then we also have the, in terms of classical multi-scale algorithms, you have the adaptive mesh refinement, domain decomposition, and multi-resolution wavelet based results. So all these new methods are coming up. So there are a lot of various things, but how well they are, again, is a question of research. Studies are ongoing. So for example, here you see, I'll show an example of concurrent multi-scale simulation. Okay, so here you have a crack in A. Figure A is a crack, right? So you can see these dots. These are the atomistic models. These are the MD, right? And this grid on the side is the finite element mesh. So what we are able to do is that we can generate the crack by itself. We are not even going to say there is a crack here. We're just going to apply forces and the crack starts to form by itself. How? So if you zoom into this, you can see that there is, you can see these bonds being broken between these atoms. And if you go deeper still, you can see this, these atoms, and they are linked to each other through orbitals and, these bonds. So you firstly, in A, you have the system which is described by the finite element mesh outside the crack region of the crack tip, right? And in the nonlinear region where there is crack growth happening, the plasticity, the bond breakage, that is modeled by the molecular dynamics method. And then at the very tip where you decide when a bond is being broken, you can have a quantum mechanical approach to decide where the bonds break. Sometimes the bonds can reform because these are electrostatic bonds, right? There is no such thing as a permanent uh, debonding at that level. So in terms of multi-scale modeling of material and structural response, we apply the simple models at the smallest scales and then simulate the behavior, the emergence of complex behavior. And these in these models, about 1 million or more atoms or elements need to be routinely analyzed. So, and large number of dynamic response with large rotations and those sort of things to be conducted also. So again, bringing you back to the various levels that we have discussed, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the corresponding numerical methods that are used for determining the material properties at each of these levels, starting from level 1 molecular dynamic simulation, level 2 and 3 you can do finite element and these quasi-continuum lattice-based methods, and then level 4 is homogenization using rules of mixtures or finite element method. We all know much about the CSH gel, and we know that there are several species of CSH gel, which tobermorite, thaumasite, jenite, ophyllite, and then the cement paste sets when the CSH gel forms a connected network, and within the network you have the nanopore or gel spore system, wherein you have the pore, the water, and then the CSH solid in this. So it is the CSH gel properties finally, which is at the lowest level, right, which dictates how the entire composite, this complex composite called concrete, behaves, right? Because the CSH gel is the binder finally of everything. So in terms of at levels 1 and 2, which is dominated by the evolution of the structure through hydration, the capillary pore size and the porosity decrease due to the consumption of water. So these are all well-known phenomena. All of us, many know about this. And the size of the gel pore depend on the structure of CSH and relatively constant. And then the gel pore sizes are in the orders of tens of nanometers. So one of the challenges is to determine the high temperature response of concrete. In some cases, concrete is used in nuclear power plants, furnaces, our concrete in structures might be subjected to, large temperatures during fires and things like that, accidents, right? So what happens is that as the concrete gets heated up, you see that there is water vapor loss, siliceous concrete strength loss, calcium hydroxide dissociates, quartz starts to expand, right? Calcium carbonate starts to separate out. And then at even higher temperatures above 800 degrees, you'll see at around 1200 or so, that after, I think, beyond 600, concrete is not structurally useful anymore. And at around somewhere about 200 to 400 degrees, there is explosive spalling of the material. But at very high temperatures of 1200 degrees or above, concrete actually starts to melt. So there's a growing interest in at least at the nano level, how to improve these thermal properties. So when you want to look at it, so energy efficiency, thermal conductivity, so all these things are called the so-called thermomechanical properties of individual cement, are of very important interest for the industry. But determining these properties at the micro scale is not feasible, right? It's not, you cannot get pure CSH gel, and you cannot get all these pure components. You cannot test them in a lab, right? You cannot get a cube of CSH, right? So pure hydration products cannot be synthesized or isolated at the mesoscales required for thermal or mechanical testing. So these can be characterized at the using molecular dynamics at the molecular level, right? The mechanical properties of various constituents varying can be derived at various temperatures using appropriate so-called force fields. We'll talk about that. So these molecular dynamic studies use these available force field to predict the thermomechanical properties of the uh, uh, molecules and find out properties such as the melting temperature, coefficient of thermal expansion. Obviously, and here we're looking at the molecular dynamics models of various cement constituents ranging from tobermonite, thenardite, periclase, iron oxide, hydrogranite, garnet, ettringite, gypsum, calcium oxide, right? C4AF, C3S, etc. And all the way up to CSH gel. So these structures have actually been derived by other researchers, and they are available in the database, molecular dynamics database. So these are structures which are representative. They may not be really, what's happening in nature, but these are the closest thing that we have in terms of based on the physics of it. So in molecular dynamics, we have an initial structure which starts like this, and then we apply the equations of motion, and these bonds are forces. Basically, they act like springs, mass systems, right? And then we equilibrate them for pressure, temperature, volume, internal energy, and then mechanical properties are checked. So there's something called bonded and unbonded or non-bonded interactions. Here we're looking at the electrostatic forces, van der Waals forces are different, right? So, and we model various degrees of freedom. In the top you see the just the axial stretch, and then you have the rotation, you have out of plane motion, torsion. So we combine them to generate the model complexity, right? And you can, as you know, and I'm sure pretty much most of us we can remember the hydrogen potential, right? That hydrogen potential is the the force field. We can derive the force field out of the hydrogen potential. So these materials, they are available. The properties are all available in these. There are material databases, crystallography material databases, which give these crystal structure, which also give their theoretical properties for reference temperatures, right? At reference temperatures and pressures. So we've done the studies of looking at various minerals. In this case, we have C3S, and we've applied various types of force fields or bonding between the atoms. And we've tried to model what happens at various temperatures. Okay, so here you have UFF dynamic, and this is the UFF normal. And we've seen what happens to the lattice parameters, which is the distance, the average distance between the atoms, right? That starts to increase as the temperature goes up. And the density, what's happening to the density is starting to reduce and suddenly drops off at around 1200 degrees. It starts to drop off very quickly. Here you can see at 1200 degrees, there is a similar increase in the lattice parameters, which shows that the material has started to melt. So here we've done some materials testing using molecular dynamic simulations of various minerals, C3S, C2S, C4AF, all these things, and we've derived the various material tensor constant. From this we have derived the macroscopic material properties from these molecular dynamics. And we have derived the stiffness tensor, the Cauchy stiffness tensor for each of these materials at each of these temperatures, how it varies, using several different potentials. So this was work done by my PhD student in 2016. And so then we were able to derive the mechanical properties from the CIJ, right, the Cauchy stiffness tensor, and calculate the E, K, and G, the Young's modulus, bulk modulus, and the shear modulus, how they change with temperature. So you can see obviously that their properties are reducing with higher temperature, which is as expected. And then the how the Poisson ratio also changes. So we found that pretty much there is not much of a difference in Poisson ratio up to very high temperatures. There's just a little bit of scatter here and there. And in some cases, there is some increase. But in many cases, for example, in this case, the C4AF, but it also depends on the type of force field that we are using, whether it's a universal force field or a compass 2, compass 1, CBFF, DFF. So it depends, because the nature of the interaction between the atoms changes when you change the force field. So simulation time, we look at the unit cell, right? These unit cells which are shown, the larger the number of atoms within the unit cell, right? So the larger time it takes to run the simulation. So here we've seen up to 10 hours or more for each simulation as the size of the domain increases. Now, at levels 1 and 2, one of the the major causes for what happens within an ITZ, or the interface transition zone, right, is the particle packing effect. Now, because of this, what happens is, if you look carefully at this figure, right, you notice that there is a aggregate, and then it is on the edge of that aggregate, there are these cement particles, right? Now, if you look at the cement particles carefully, there is more yellow, which is the porosity, okay? For example, there is more yellow near the aggregate than further away from it. Isn't it? So this is the particle packing effect. So what happens because of inefficient packing of cement particles near the aggregate surface? So the aggregate has relatively, it's flatter compared to the cement particles. So it's almost like a flat edge. So the inefficient packing causes less cement density at the edge of the aggregate, higher porosity happens, okay, and which remains after hydration. So the width of the ITZ also scales with median particle size. So just the packing, nothing else, causes this particular effect also. So there are several factors, and this particle packing effect also causes this sort of reduction in density as you go towards the interface between the cement and the aggregate. So another is the one-sided growth effect, wherein you have the percolation, right? And then you have the size of the, so the capillary pores near the aggregate, reactive growth of the solid occurs from cement paste side, but not from the aggregate side. So there's one-way growth. So there's some bias in this. So this gives rise to higher porosity, and the net growth of solids will be smaller than the ITZ. So this is one example of this level 2, wherein you have this 200 micron unhydrated this material, and then you can see this big aggregate particle. You have the porous cement with pores in it. You have unhydrated cement, right? So this aggregate particle is a very fine aggregate particle. Keep that in mind, please. You see air voids, right? Porosities, dense spaced region. You have a porous ITZ around this particle, aggregate, fine aggregate particle, right? So what these huge things which look like the coarse aggregate are actually sand particles, very fine sand particles. So here we can see how the interface transition zone can give rise to these micro cracks, and so it is the weak link. It is accepted to be the microstructural feature which has the greatest influence on the fracture properties, right? So it is very important to study what's happening in the interface transition zone. So why there is higher capillary porosity, and why crack nucleation happens there, right? So it's of the order of 20 to 50 microns. So here is some of the studies we did in way back in 2012, wherein we modeled at the level 2. So this is what you see is a representative volume element. Okay, it's a cube which is 100 microns by 100 microns dimension. So we started off with just the cement particles. So this is only cement. There are no sand or fine aggregates. This is not mortar. This is pure cement. So it initially starts off with the cement particles, and you have the CSH matrix porosity. So this, we just studied what sort of distribution we can get from this. So this we looked at various types of cements, and so we did using a software called Cement Height 3D. We generated the particle size distributions, their locations, the various constituents, and generated, wrote several MATLAB codes I had to write to generate the finite element mesh with the particle distributions and everything. And then we could import that, write a sort of abacus routine within MATLAB to run the abacus solver. And we can do, once the mesh is made, once the cement geometry is ready and the material properties, everything are assigned, we can do various runs, linear elastic, quasi-static, dynamic, explicit, wave propagation simulations were also done. So this was developed by this three-dimensional cement hydration. This Cement Height 3D was developed by NIST, by Mr. Dale Bentz, and then they applied periodic boundaries, wherein if the particle ends here, it starts somewhere else, so there is no discontinuity. It's like a toroid actually. So digitized spherical particles are used to approximate the complex 3D shapes. The approximation is adequate as long as the particle size distribution and the phase volumes and volume fractions and surface fractions are maintained. And so this all these things have been can be obtained using testing of particle size distribution, volume fraction, XRD, and all these things are done to find out the phase volume fractions, phase volume areas. So this is the workflow basically, wherein we generate the particles, put them in the box, domain, and how the distribution of phases is done, and then we find out the what are the volume fractions, etc., and then find out the actual microstructure and do the evolution. The reaction is also simulated in this software, Cement Height 3D. So material properties in terms of the various components, several, as we know, cement has actually several dozens of almost 50 to 60 different components. So major volume fractions can be simulated, and then you have these material data which was obtained from nano indentation, and the modulus of elasticity, Poisson ratio of macroscopic properties are also taken wherever possible. So there's 18 different material inputs were given, including empty porosity, and looked at initial unhydrated microstructure, wherein this RBE is broken up into its components here: porosity, C3S, gypsum, hemihydrite, anhydrite. And then we are, so this is the overall unhydrated microstructure of the RBE, 100 micron by 100 micron. You can see the porosity, C3S, C2S, C3A, anhydrite, hemihydrite, gypsum, C4A. So these are the initial constituents of the cement. And then once we add water, you see that what happens, you have got on the hydrated on, let's say 28th day, you see the same, this thing has changed, right? The cement, you can see the RBE, that RBE, it's not expanded, but you can see that there is a lot more different phases. New material is coming in, and these circles are no longer very circular. They are, jagged. Material has interpenetrated and all that. So you got hydration products simulated through what is called cellular automata. Okay, nearest neighbor rules, and you have chemical kinetics rules. So within, this was written in a C++ program, and then we can see how these materials are also distributed in the same volume. These are all randomly distributed materials, right? Based on, so this is the outcome. Now, there is several ways, knowing that these are the various material volume fractions, we can also get a understanding using simpler bounds, rule of mixture bounds, Voigt and Royce approximation, rule of mixtures, inverse rule of mixtures. And then there are several, two-phase, three-phase models, n+1 phase sphere model. And then you have Mori Tanaka, SLB, and Yang Huang models. Right? So they basically homogenize and bring out the effective properties based on the knowledge of the effective physical property of each of the phase and what is the volume fraction of that particular phase. So it's like a average, weighted average, some sort of weighted averages. So then, in homogenization, when you have a RBE, you can also find out the stiffness tensor of the RBE. And there are three different ways of applying boundary conditions. One is the kinematic uniform boundary condition, wherein you can apply prescribed displacements at the boundary of the RBE or the representative volume element. Another is the static uniform boundary conditions, when you can apply prescribed tractions or forces or stresses on the RBE. So one is like a load control, another is like a displacement control. So static uniform boundary condition is like a load control, whereas kinematic uniform boundary is like a displacement control. And then you have the periodic boundary conditions, in which you have, it's also sort of like a kinematic, but here the boundary conditions are periodic. You apply homogeneous strain can be imposed over the entire RBE. So for small RBE, the material properties from each of these will be different. So one check of whether this RBE which you have developed is of the correct size or not is that you can see the properties obtained from each of these boundary conditions, whether they match or not. Okay, when the RBE is large enough or it is correct enough, these will give similar results. And there are other methods like the asymptotic expansion homogenization, FFT homogenization, etc. And coming to the microstructure damage modeling, right? We have basically crack propagation is an essential phenomena that has to be modeled. So it is required for strength characterization of brittle cementitious materials. There are two different types of modeling this damage. One is the smeared crack model, and is the cohesive zone model. It is very well known and implemented in Abacus, wherein you have it can model the various interfaces and can be used to connect so many adjacent components by sharing the nodes. Here the node gets split into two once the crack propagates through that. And then you have additional terms, Heaviside function. One is for the out of plane, and then you also have for the crack tip, you have the there is another these what do you call 1 over square root functions for the crack tip. So in Cementhite 3D, when we looked at the cements, we can also, it allows us to track the various volume fractions during the curing. So how the volume fractions change across the major constituents at various stages of curing. And then when we are looking at domain size, we also looked at what is the size effect that can be modeled. So whether the volume fractions remain the same, even if you give the same scaled consistent volume fractions, consistent area, the surface area of the individual particles is very important because that determines the rates of reactions. So that has to be conserved, that has to be, and particle size distributions have to be maintained no matter what the size of the domain. So those require special scaling which is to be done, volume fractions of various constituents. So we've done a lot of studies ranging from 10 by 10 microns all the way up to 200 by 200 microns, almost, 0.2 millimeters of material. We have been able to simulate the hydration, the mechanical properties, the randomness, what is happening to the individual particles. And you can see all that. Okay, so the limitation is based only on the computational power. You can go up to 1000 by 1000 by 1000 also, but Abaqus, we came up with limitations within Abaqus itself. So at 200 by 200 by 100 microns, that was the maximum. We had 4 billion elements, and that is the maximum Abaqus would take. It would not take anything more than that. So basically, we had a joke that we broke Abaqus, but we used other methods to go beyond that limitation, and we'll talk about that. So here is the prescribed kinematic boundary conditions, wherein for example, this is a box, this is the RBE, and we apply one uniaxial load along the x-axis, and then we applied roller boundary conditions on all the others. We restrain these faces that they will move together in a way that they will move plane. So we tried to ensure that plane sections remain plane in this, right? And then we also applied pure shear boundary conditions. Pure shear is different, as you know, from engineering shear. And then there is some instances where we calculate the various, moduli of this material. So in Abaqus, the periodic boundary conditions can be enforced using the equations keyword, and the keyword allows only those nodes which are matching coordinates on either side. So there are certain limitations, and we made sure that the models follow those. So in periodic boundary conditions, you can see this particle ends here and it starts on the opposite edge. So there is a continuous matter. So you can take windows from any portion, right, and create a new microstructure or new material with different things there, new sample rather. So here, in this case, we have applied, we've grouped the nodes into various faces, edges, and vertices, and we've written algorithms to group them and apply the boundary conditions. And then a couple of things which we observed was that the RV size has to be at least 3 to 5 times the largest aggregate size. That's why we have the cement cube is 150 mm because it is 3 to 5 times larger than the largest aggregate that is allowed. That's around 40 mm, right? We use generally 20 mm for structures, but code allows up to 40 mm. So in the case, the number of RV instances is required to get a effective elastic tensor. If the RV is smaller, or that is you take a smaller volume, there's going to be more scatter, and then more specimens have to be collected. So more RV instances have to be created, right? So it is the RV response may not be necessarily isotropic, meaning same properties everywhere. The stiffness matrix need not be isotropic due to there might be some inhomogeneities. Okay, so this is one toy example that we looked at wherein we apply uniaxial loading. This is a homogeneous isotropic material, and if you apply from this you can calculate what is the E and the Poisson ratio. You can see the reduction in the cross section. That you can measure these dimension reductions, calculate the strains by applying, either known stresses or strains, and you can vice versa. You can calculate the stress or the strain depending on that. Various. This is pure shear. Slightly larger RBE, slightly more number of elements. So here we looked at material properties with different random, well, not random, but various components which were spatially distributed randomly. And then we looked at what happens when we have a very small RBE, is a 10 by 10,000 elements. Very rough properties come out. So the surface, the deformations are very, very rough. But as you increase, let's say for 8,000 elements, 20 by 20 by 20, you can see the same material, better behaved representative volume element. This is for the actual. So we can extract the stiffness tensor from these, or the elastic tensor from these tests which we have done here, pull and push. Basically, we probe it and find out what are the stiffness tensor components. We can also do the Voigt and Roy's upper and lower bounds of rules of mixtures, and also for we can find out what is the strain energy and calculate each of the elastic stiffnesses, the engineering stiffnesses from that. So we found that the material is basically quite isotropic. Here you see 22.04 and 21.99. The diagonal is almost always near 41.8, right? So we found that these materials are, basically it is a isotropic material. So this is basically isotropic. Can you imagine that? It looks so random, right? So the randomness itself is so much that it is random everywhere you look. So it is isotropic. So here we can see how the degree of hydration this is for a 100 by 100 micron RBE, which we found was ideal and did not give us any numerical errors. So we can see how the modulus of elasticity changes when we apply the kinematic versus the periodic boundary conditions. And these two overlap very well, which says that this 100 by 100 micron is a very effective and it is the right size for this. And we can see how we plotted with respect to the degree of hydration, which is basically time. And then we also studied what happens with the size effect when you change the domain of the RBE, domain size of the RBE, and we found that after a certain amount there is very less effect of the RBE size. So not just 100, but you can go to slightly smaller ones also, depending on the material characteristic that you want to study. For our material characteristics, which was the elastic stiffness, smaller were also possible, but it may be so for other phenomena, larger micron, larger RBEs might be required. And then we looked also at the analytical bounds when we have looked at large number of uniformly distributed coated spherical inclusions, right? Similar to what is considered in the spherical packing theory. And we found out what is the effective bulk and shear modulus from which we can calculate the various elastic properties. And we found out these are comparing well with the finite element properties, the RBE that we got. And then in terms of the age versus, let us say, the principal modulus, we found out that there is a significant effect of the type of boundary conditions that you put depending on the size of the RBE. And then you see, as the size of the number of elements increases, there is a convergence. at around 100,000, 1 lakh elements, it starts to level out. Properties start to level out. So we did some windowing. We looked at variation in the volume fractions for a. So within this volume, what we've selected is we selected small cores out of this 100 by 100 RBE. So sample sizes of 10 by 10 microns or 20 by 20 microns corresponding to the Gauss integration points of this, sort of Gauss integration. What would have been the Gauss integration location of this cube if it is a C3D8 or a hexahedral element, right? So we've taken that and we plotted, so we could see that there's similar behavior. But as the RB size increases, the volume fractions also level out. After 50, it is quite good. So we found that somewhere around 50 to 70 would be a good way to, here also the same indication. And then we plotted the compression strength, how the degree of hydration versus hydration cycles within the software. And then we were able to plot the compressive strength evolution with the hydration, and also how the modulus changes from this compressive strength. We were able to calculate what is the modulus, effective modulus for the material in terms of the age and this thing. Within Abaqus, this is one of the few strength calculations which has been done. And then, time, again, it takes tremendous amounts of time. This is 100, 10, this is a million seconds. So usually we used to put the computer, we used to submit the Abaqus runs onto the supercomputer with 32 nodes and everything. And it used to take about a week to get the results. And we got several interesting results. And then, so coming to computation for cementitious materials, not just the material, the simulations, but also there are computationally intensive experimental methods wherein doing the experiment and getting data out of that experiment itself requires a lot of computational skills, and computation and post-processing is required. So, for example, image-based deterioration assessment of concrete, and we've looked at meso and micro and mesoscale evolution of the cement, internal cement structure, microstructure using, macro and micro tomography. And also there are other, digital image correlation based full field strain methods. And we've also applied artificial neural networks to, characterize the strength of, RCC members. So in this particular case, we've quantified the concrete deterioration using the digital image processing techniques. We've followed the standard procedures of exposing the material specimens to the 4 reagents HCl, H2SO4, NaCl, MgSO4 at 5% concentration for various time periods. And now after these chemical attacks, we have looked at the individual cube and photographed it. And we've done statistical analysis on the photographs, digital photographs that have been obtained. We have got very good correlations with the grayscale intensities and deterioration measures like mass loss, dimension loss, and also strength loss. So this is what we have done, experimental setup. And this is an image, just a trial image processing. Here we show what is the effect of ambient lighting. What happens if you change the lighting, because this color and imaging depends on the lighting, right? So a lot of things depend on the intensity of the light. So we looked at ambient indoor lighting, medium indoor, and outdoor bright lighting, and looked at these various, the grayscale. We found out that ambient indoor lighting gives quite different results compared to medium indoor and outdoor. So the outdoor conditions can be successfully simulated to a large degree using the medium indoor light. Very similar. So all further conditions studies were conducted using the indoor lab lighting itself. And then we found out that variation among this slight variation in the grayscale of amongst the various 6 faces of the cube. And then we looked and we found that there was a certain correlation between the peaks of these for various chemicals, how the peak shifted, the grayscale image intensity peak shifted for various days of exposure for each of these chemical attacks. And then it was found to be that this shift is a intensity as well as the grayscale mean was found to be a good predictor of the extent of deterioration when exposed to HCl and MgSO4. Whereas in the case of H2SO4 and sodium chloride, it was a moderate predictor of indicator. So we found out and established that imaging can identify the effect of individual chemicals, and we can identify which chemical is causing the deterioration. These are various temperature variation, and we've done rebound hammer test. So there is significant amount of post-processing computational required in order to do the imaging and the RGB-based studies. That's why I thought it would be good to include this, that computational aspects are not just limited to numerical experiments, but also to real experiments, wherein a lot of significant post-processing, post-computation, calculations are required. So this was one. In another case, we had looked at the micro and mesoscale evolution using tomography, and we tried to capture the internal failure mechanism of concrete at various thermal loads, meaning fire, and we visualized the pore propagation inside the sample due to thermal loads, new pores, porosity system, porosity network, internal porosity network. We were able to see how it evolves with temperature and the effects of what is the effect of thermal load on the air voids, what happens when the water is evaporating in the hydrated sample, and how the network of pore exists across multiple levels and scales, meso, micro, and nano scales. So here we looked at Portland cement, PPC, OPC 43 and 53. And then we subjected it to 100, 400, 500, and 800 degrees centigrade. We can see that, the PPC is quite performing quite well compared to the OPC 43 and 53 at high temperatures. And then this is the temperature gradient that was applied. We applied and then held it steady for some time, and then again drop down to ambient temperature. And then we found out that as the temperature increases, the compressive strengths of the material go down quite rapidly after a certain critical temperature of 500 to 600. So we used microtomography initially to do both 2D and 3D image analysis, looking at the radii of the pores, what is the circularity of the pores, what is the nearest neighbor distance between the pores. And then we also conducted 3D image analysis, wherein we looked at the diameter of the pores, area of the pores, and the volume sphericity of the pores. How am I with time, madam? How much time is remaining? Okay, I'll continue. So then we looked at the internal changes in the hydrated cement at various hydrated mortar, actually. This is cement at various stages of exposure to. So this is we did a high resolution CT scan of the mortar cube, the cement cubes, and this gives us various around 75 layers, slices at various temperatures. So these are heated up and then cooled. You don't put the hot one inside the HRCT, obviously. So there are several steps when we looked at it and we scanned it, and we used ImageJ software and several other software to do the rendering volume, to convert these slices into volumetric data, and also to plot which is which, what is the size of the porosity, color code them. And based on that, we were able to find out the number of how the porosity increases, what is the number of pores, what is the statistic in terms of the maximum and minimum diameter of the pores. And we found out that the porosity and number of pores in all the slices have increased with temperature for all the three materials. This you can see for OPC how for one slice, for example, how the porosity is increasing from 27 degrees to 800 degrees. Same is the case with 53 OPC. And then here what we see is that the circularity changes. These become from circular to ellipsoid, and they interconnect, right? Interconnected porosity with, there is no opening on the outside in some cases. So this brings us to the point where whether mercury intrusive porosity is a good predictor or not, right? So here we can see, using the post-processing, we were able to get the pore networks on the high resolution CT scan at various temperatures for all three materials. And you can see this beautiful images show how the porosity, the entire thing has become porous with temperature. So this finding was a new finding that was communicated. This is the distribution of pores. You can see and look at the pore sizes. This is the pore network which is forming in OPC 43. You can see now it is all interconnected, right? And in PPC also. The thing is that these interconnected pore networks now form planes of failure, right? These are where the entire thing can fail. The crack already is there. So we looked at the various in 2D and 3D analysis. We did a comparison, basically different ways of putting together the CT scans and looking at porosity evolution using two different statistics. That was the difference between 2D and 3D analysis. We looked at how the compressive strength changes, how the porosity increases for all three materials. And then we tried to fit certain statistics. And then this was the microtomography, wherein we looked at very, very small region of interest in the material. And we were able to get, again, the maximum micropore and porosities, and looked at how the porosity increases with time. So this is PPC. Suddenly here you see this is OPC 43. This is entire plane is there wherein it can fail, right? So, and there is sudden increase in PPC. There is a sudden increase in the number of pores after 400 degrees. Right after 400, you can see after C there is D. There's significant sudden increases start to happen, and the strength reduces. Unlike PPC, the number of pores in OPC is greater at all temperatures, since the performance is lower. In PPC, here you can see the various pore set in the sample, various diameter pores. And this required tremendous amount of computational effort. Even though this was an experimental study, the amount of computing we had to do in order to visualize these, in order to group everything, make the porosities visible, for distinguishable in terms of their diameters, all that was quite a challenge. It took a lot of effort on the part of my student Harsha to get these things done computationally. Okay. So this post-processing, so here we could see that there is a sphericity change with temperature, and then we fitted that with some standard temperature constitutive parameters, and then we could capture the coalescence of pores into cracks, and we could predict when the OPC43 loses integrity and strength. And then we found out that the pores, of course, are not going to be spherical in shape. And then most inaccessible pores were estimated using the high resolution CT scan and the microtomography. There is a large number of inaccessible pores in samples up to 400 degrees. So what is happening is that the MIP is able to detect all this. So the evolution of the pores with the temperature is a continuous process. We detected that using our computational effort. And then the the pores get interconnected to form preferential failure planes. So porosity, so the mean porosity values observed in this study, both at meso and micro scale, are much higher in comparison to the published data which was obtained from the mercury intrusion porosimetry conducted by other researchers. So MIP may not be sufficient for conducting these sort of studies. Okay, it is a good indicator of the trends and all that. It's a well-established study methodology. In this particular case, we were more successful using the computer tomography studies. So the major contribution of this was to characterize the strength degradation with thermal conductivity, and also they looked at chemical composition, pore structure, pore size evolution, and we established the existence of the interconnected pore structures and as well as inaccessible pores, right? Which indicates that all these fluid penetration methods will underestimate the overall porosity, which is very important finding actually. So this work was primarily experimental in scope, but we incorporated these computational techniques, and then we extracted so much more information, and now this can be used to validate more accurate models, damage continuum models, which can be used for dynamic processes. So the next, madam, how am I doing with time? Do I have sufficient time? Okay. So the digital image correlation is another tool which we have been using for tracking the image registration techniques and for finding out the full field deformation, stress and strain in the material. So we take reference images, we deform it and find out we find out strain fields in the material. So it works by comparing the photographs. So this is all experimental but sufficient. There is a lot of computing which is required to extract the information. So a pattern must be painted on the surface, and then so that one advantage is that no gauges have to be placed on the bridge or the structure, and it's as accurate as LVDT. Just by taking images, preferably flat images, we can look at what is the 32. So I will quickly go to some of these interesting results that we have done at NIT Warangal. So we've done a lot of these RCC specimen studies, almost lab scale, as big as they can get, and we've applied this random speckle pattern. We've looked at the global deformation, detection of local damage, crack detection. We have done that. We have also come up with a new kind of speckle pattern which is under patent. We found out that overall the results in terms of load deflection, moment curvature are very comparable, very good with either even dial gauges or LVDTs. They're quite good, and they give us much more information compared to these point location based sensors. And then we have taken all that data, the post-processing of this data, image data itself, I have not spoken about it, but it takes a lot of effort, computational effort, to do the correlation, digital image correlation. And then after that has been done, we again use artificial neural networks to do the predictive analysis, to do damage detection and condition assessment based on the imaging. So the idea was that the person can take an image and look at the detect the state of the structure just from the image. So we were quite successful with that in showing that the condition, we can predict immediately what is the damage index and what is the condition corresponding to that by just taking a comparison of baseline reference image with a relatively deformed image. We were able to compute the strains, deflection, and curvatures from that image, and calculating the ultimate moment capacity and the yield strength. And we developed a master curve on which back we can say, okay, this is the damage index versus curvature. So given the curvature, we could immediately go and say this is the remaining capacity of the structure. And then we use several different methods. So this is the big picture in terms of materials, computational approaches and aspects of cementitious materials. The modeling, CSH based MD simulations for selection of the materials. Mesoscale modeling helps us with for elastic constants, getting the stress strain curves of various new materials even before we test them experimentally. So the challenges are there's a lot of diversity of theoretical approaches and modeling behaviors. You have compression softening, tension softening, aggregate interlock, confinement effect, so many other things. And then you have incompatibility of models and approaches which cannot be calibrated to assumptions easily. And then experience of the analyst, the person doing the study, also is has an effect on the results. And sometimes too much information is generated. We don't need too much information in some cases, because we don't have the knowledge about it also. And sometimes we do not have a complete understanding of the behavior, right? And then sometimes the approach itself, the assumption itself, is not suitable for concrete. For example, continuum mechanics, wherein everything is homogeneous, is not suitable for concrete, which has lots of voids, cracks, micro cracks, inclusions, etc. Interfaces are there. So continuum mechanics doesn't work very well at those cases. So developers are working on models for RC structures, different theories and assumptions. And numerical models should have will be based on modeling the behavior of the concrete and its interaction with the reinforcement, right? Rather than assumption on how the concrete model should behave. So we are trying now, it has to be made into more generic, more generally applicable models, rather than give me the solution to fix this small problem right now. So an approach is that people are moving away from continuum models into non-local models, which is peridynamics or lattice continuum based. So non-local based, wherein everything, the background material itself is discrete. So it is similar in some cases to the molecular dynamic simulations. Only thing is, this happens to be at mesoscale length and time scales. So it has a lot of great potential. See, in the case of continuum models, the governing differential equations are to be solved, whereas in the case of peridynamics, you have a integral solution. So this allows us to treat cracks in a very natural way, and so a crack doesn't have to become a discontinuity. In this case, it is just a outcome of breaking of bonds. So it's a very simple and natural way of doing things, but the key barriers are there. Several people are trying to work on it. So it's a multidisciplinary, because there's a lot of interacting phenomena at various levels. So now, use of numerical models is not without risks. And there is also, the adopted material models also determine the quality and output of the calculations. And there's a lot of potential to support the design activities as various levels of observation, and to connect these levels in a multi-scale approach. So that is what is the future of modeling. So they can be approached and modeled using different schematization approaches, and not only just single phenomena, but several simultaneously acting phenomena have to be explored and coupled and linked. So previous simplification of delinking and saying that one phenomena does not approach or affect the other phenomena, that is going out, and people are now coming back to looking at everything at the same time. So the fundamental approach is to be understanding the underlying physical and chemical phenomena at multiple scales. And then homogenized material models are practically, they are being used. Most of the world construction of using cement is done using that. All of us are very well familiar with that. These are my references. Thank you for your attention. I hope I've not taken up too much time.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, we have some queries, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Quickly, we'll take the queries, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Sir, from one participant, sir.
Yeah.
How does the admixture work while mixing in green concrete to reduce temperature, sir?
How does the admixture work? Which admixture? You mean some chemical admixture? Okay. So you're asking about when in green concrete, how does the heat of hydration get affected when you put some sort of retardant or accelerant? Is that correct?
Participant can please unmute yourself.
Is that did I understand correctly? Yeah, if so, yeah, if the I'll just continue. If it is an accelerant, yes, the heat of hydration will, it is basically to affect the chemical kinetics, right? So when you are doing hydration, it's a chemical reaction. When you apply accelerant, you are accelerating the reaction. Obviously, the hydration heat of that reaction will be higher. If you apply a retardant, the heat of hydration will be lower. So it depends on the admixture, whether it is an accelerant or a retardant. I think that is sufficient. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Next question, sir. In a seismic prone area, what is the process to construct concrete structure, RCC structure, for longer period of life and to save reversal of forces, sir?
That's a very complex question, madam. Actually, it is a two-part question. Actually, it is two questions in one. One is that you're looking at degradation of the material. Another is the cyclical loading, which the structure is exposed to during a seismic event or any other, service loads. So they are interconnected. Now, how they are interconnected is that when the material is degrading over time, and we are doing a study on this right now, actually. One of my funded projects is based on looking at degradation of bridges and how, pardon? So when you're looking at the degradation of say structures, the one is how is it affected by various environments, and we are trying to quantify what is happening internally and how the strength reduction is happening. And another thing is that there is a lot of lack of literature between accelerated testing, accelerated deterioration, as well as the actual deterioration. Nature takes longer time. It's at the dilute limit of these acids and the environmental agents, and it is never one agent. It's always several agents which are mixed up together, and we don't know how they are interacting, what they are doing. So we are trying to find out all these things one by one. That is part one of the question. The second question which you have asked, which I tried to answer, is that this degradation, which is a continuous thing, right? So suppose the earthquake happens or the cyclical load event happens at a time where the, here in the cyclical load also there are two regimes. One is the long-term cyclical, which is the fatigue because of traffic on a bridge, for example. That is one. The second is a short-term acute cyclical loading like an earthquake. So the environment effect and the fatigue, these will produce similar deteriorations. I mean, say similar, the nature is similar in terms of reducing the strength. In case of the acute cyclical loading such as earthquakes, they are again affected by the deteriorated material as well as the pre-fatigued nature of the material. So if the structure is new, the performance will be during an earthquake will be different from that of an older building. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, sir. Sir, another question, sir. What is entrapped air and entrained air and bubble formation in green concrete? In green concrete mix, how it enhances the quality of concrete, sir?
I'm not an expert in concrete per se, but I will attempt to answer this by saying that, when there is entrained air in the material, basically the density of the concrete reduces, the insulation properties of the material increases, the thermal, acoustic, vibration damping, all these things increase. So it is very good, beneficial in terms of these dampening properties and isolating properties. However, the strength may also reduce, the capacity, the resistance to deterioration may reduce. So these are pluses and minuses which have to be considered. Yes.
One more question, sir. Sir, how can we determine the HKL values of the atoms in lattice? And for concrete and cement, how the crystal arrangement can be taken? Is it
Yes,
from,
actually, yeah.
is it from JPCRD data?
Yes, ma'am. There are several databases, and they can be, these are freely available mostly. The data which we used was downloaded from one such database. Yes. What we did is we looked at, we applied various boundary conditions and we applied various force fields, and then we've looked at the one is the accuracy of the force fields and self-consistency between these force fields, and overall what is the phenomena, that how close it is to the published literature in terms of replicating the natural phenomena. That's what we have looked at. Yes.
Is it possible through any microstructure study to get the exact percentage of chemical compounds, sir, like C3S, C2S, C3, etc., sir?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, exact is a very difficult word, but we can get, sort of, we've done in this particular studies, we've done XRD studies also, which I have not shown, which, apart from just these tomography studies, we've done several XRD, X-ray based studies also. But apart from those experiments, if you're talking about, say, numerical experiments, here we can look at what is the effect of, finally, what is the hydration products, what is the volume of hydration products that has been created, volume fractions that can be easily detected, that can easily be computed from this particular model study that we did. I hope that answers the question. Is there any specific thing you're looking for in this?
Nothing, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, another question, sir. Microstructural characterization of concrete, is it possible only through SEM or EDAX, or any other devices also there, sir?
Uh, Actually, SEM, AFM, even nano indentation, which is again part of AFM. There are micro indenters also. That is one thing. We have done micro tomography, and micro X-ray graphy can also be done, and micro XRD. These studies can be done, but the equipment is not generally available everywhere. We also had to hunt for some equipment elsewhere also. But yeah, it is possible to do those things.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one last question, sir, from my side. Actually, I'm also doing MTech, sir, in OU.
Ma'am.
So I was working with on Abacus, sir, for concrete beam. So I had a doubt, had a difficulty, sir, in identifying the different crack zones, sir, when load is being applied, and to when the ultimate load is reached, sir. How do we identify other than the when we plot a graph, sir?
Right. So based on the visual graphics, is there some way to identify it? Is that what your question is? Based on how it looks?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that is difficult,
Yes, sir.
because how it looks depends on the software, actually, what sort of representation they are giving. For example, in Etina, there is a Etina software, right? 3D concrete simulation. It shows that it has a different way of representing. Abacus has a different way of representing. ANSYS may show differently. So those are not really, uh, qualitatively sound in terms of being able to detect. But having said that, you can look at the, very simple things like what we do in the lab when we, after studying several tests, after seeing several tests, you can surely say, okay, if a crack forms at this particular location and it starts to move at this particular rate and it reaches a certain length, it is pretty sure that it is going to fail or not, right?
Sir, how do we determine the ultimate load, sir, other than from graph, sir?
Ultimate load other than graph is quite difficult, because ultimate load, I don't know how to answer that question. Ultimate load, if not from a graph, uh, maybe I've not understood the question correctly.
Sir, sir, okay, sir. Thank you so much for the clarification. I'll contact you for the
Yeah,
further
please do
details.
contact. We can discuss on this.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Can I exit?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Participants are requested to remain. We'll continue the next session, stress management by yoga. We request the participants to please switch on your videos for this session. We request all the participants to switch on their videos for this session.
Hello, 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 hello.
Now I welcome all the participants for the last session of FDP. I welcome Shashi Sharda ma'am, yoga instructor and therapist in Ayur Life Yoga. Madam, good afternoon, madam. Shashi Sharda ma'am. Station. Good afternoon, madam. Shashi Sharda ma'am.
Good afternoon, Annapurna ma'am. How are you?
Fine, madam.
Namaste.
Yeah, madam. Now you are visible, madam.
Yeah.
I request madam to take over the session.
Yes, yeah, ma'am. Am I audible to everyone?
You
Yes,
are audible, madam. You are audible, madam.
really? Yes.
Actually all the participants are muted, madam. You can just show.
Okay.
I asked them to switch on their videos. Most of them already switched on. So you can start your
Yeah.
session, madam.
Sure, ma'am. So namaste to everyone. I'm Shashi Sada, taking your session today on stress management. Is English okay and Hindi English both or only one language? You could let me know your preference.
Preferably English,
Is
madam.
English? Okay, fine. Perfect. Sure. So I'm Shashi Sada. I'll just give you a brief